Good day, ladies and gentlemen. This is Watson Michael from Ceylon Institute of English and Leadership, and welcome to the 21st Leadership Challenges series for episode number 5. And we're going to talk about the second disruption today. So we have with us Dr. Ravi Fernando. So Dr. Fernando, he's on 8 local and multinational boards. He's an alumni of the University of Cambridge and INSEAD Business School. Having completed all his sustainability studies, postgraduate and masters at Cambridge, and his strategy studies at INSEAD Business School. He's a visiting faculty in INSEAD Business School and is an executive in residence there. Dr. Fernando created the 21st century board leadership model, which was developed in June 2020, and a US copyright was secured. It was converted into a master class that is now being taught in Luxembourg, Ireland, the United Kingdom, and Sri Lanka, soon to be launched in Malaysia, Vietnam, and India in 2022. So our topic today is going to be geopolitical disruption. So, Dr. Fernando, how are you today? And
excellent.
Great. And if you could give us some definition of what is geopolitics.
Excellent. A very good morning or evening or day to all the people who are watching this video today. This is, as Watson Michael has already introduced, our 5th in a series of 6 lectures. And very soon there will be a YouTube channel where you can go to and listen to all 6 of these episodes in one go to cover all our 6 subjects as was shown in the slide. So today's topic is geopolitics. And I can tell you that all the MBA programs in the world, all the governance programs in the world, none of them have this subject in the curriculum. Means you have to learn geopolitics almost on your own. And that is one of the reasons that the 21st Century Board Leadership Masterclass has dedicated one full module for geopolitics. And by the end of today's session, all of you will know why we should concentrate also on understanding geopolitics when we develop national strategies or business strategies. So today's topic is geopolitical disruption. And from the word geopolitical disruption, you will appreciate that we see geopolitics as a disruptor to well laid out ground plans for strategies of nations and businesses. Because most of the time, what happens is geopolitics comes and disrupts those plans and affects the company or the nation's growth strategies or whatever. Right? So geopolitics generally comes and impacts your economic performance directly. And this is something we need to appreciate. Right. So what is geopolitics? So I'm going to read out to you some definitions so that every one of you understand why we are studying geopolitics today. So geopolitics is defined as the study of the way a country's size, position, influence, its power, and its relationships with other countries. And this from the Cambridge University Dictionary. So once again, geopolitics is defined as the study of the way a country's size and position influence its power and its relationships with other countries in terms of its geopolitical maneuvering. So that is a very simple definition of geopolitics. So I'm going to give you 2 more definitions, which are easy for you to Google and find out. One is, this is from Wikipedia. So Wikipedia says, geopolitics is the study of the effects of Earth's geography in terms of human and physical on politics and international relations. While geopolitics usually refers to countries and relationships between them, it may also focus on 2 other kinds of states: de facto independent states with limited international recognition, and relations with subnational geopolitical entities such as federated states that make up a federation or a confederation or a quasi-federal system. Now, in that definition, we see another angle of the subject, geopolitics. And it's very important for us to understand this angle, because this angle of understanding Earth's geography immediately triggers up the big question about how then does geopolitics play out in the subject of climate emergency and sustainability, because that is to do with the Earth's geography. Because what is getting impacted in terms of Earth geography is the continuous burning of fossil fuels, which then have an impact on the Earth's geography, both in terms of its physical state and its human state. So one can then decipher from this definition that climate emergency and the climate code red for humanity is directly impacting geopolitics as we see it. And that's why I have brought this into the 21st century leadership module, because geopolitics directly is impacted then with geography and climate change. Then I want to give one final definition. At the level of international relations, geopolitics is a method of studying foreign policy to understand, explain, and predict international political behavior through geographical variables. And that is a brilliant definition. So I'm going to say it once again. At the level of international relations, geopolitics is a method of studying foreign policy to understand, explain, and predict international political behavior through geographical variables. So the second time we are using the word geography. So now you can see why I have brought this subject into the 21st century leadership model. And it goes on to say these include area studies, climate studies, topography studies, demography studies, natural resources studies, and applied science of the region being evaluated. So that is a very comprehensive definition for all those who are listening in today. And because I want you to understand why I brought geopolitics into the mainstream of the 21st century board leadership model masterclass, because I want 21st century leaders to go way beyond business issues to understand the bigger picture of the climate emergency issues, the human and social emergency issues, as a result, the economic issues, and now also understand technology issues, geopolitical issues will also come and haunt a business strategy or a national strategy. So that is my definition of it to you, Michael.
Great. Thank you for the definition, Doctor. So you're aware of the general and specific geopolitics. So what are the general issues and the impacts of the world?
Excellent. So once again, I go back to the term geography because understanding the general issues are going to come from geography and what I would like to call the global financial system. Okay, so let me start by explaining what are the major issues in terms of general issues. There are three major general issues that are going to impact the whole world, whether we like it or not. So the very first one of that is the word debt, because every country, most countries are leveraging debt, and most countries' economies are debt funded and debt dependent. So debt then has a way of impacting the global economic order and the economic system. And if we don't understand how debt can have geopolitical ramifications, then we are missing a big point. The second big issue that is going to come and hit us from a geopolitical arena is the subject of global water scarcity. Because global water scarcity, now we are coming to a geographical issue. If you don't have water in one place, you're going to find a place which has water, because you cannot survive water. And once again, I want to re-emphasize the fact that water is the most precious resource on the planet. We can live without any other resource, but if we don't have water, which is almost 70% of our bodies, and if we don't consume water, we have no life. We will absolutely end up in a massive crisis. So two general issues, and I want to mention a third issue. I want to call it the geopolitics of fossil fuels as a third issue that is going to have global impact in terms of geopolitical disruption. So these are the three big issues. And maybe what we can do is start with the first issue that I talked about, and let's talk a little about debt. Because if we don't understand how debt can be leveraged as a geopolitical tool by organizations, then we have a problem. But just before we go into the details, let me answer another, yes. So let's understand the global economy first, because if we don't understand the global economy and understand debt in relation to the global economy, then we are basically ignoring the linkage between global economics and debt. So let's start with the global economy, the GDP. So if we look at the global GDP today, the biggest global GDP currently is being held by the US at about $20 billion. Currently, it's between 20 and 23% of the global economy. Coming very close on its heels now is China with a $13.6 trillion economy, which is accounting for about 15.8% of the world's economy. Now, these two combined are nearly half the world's economy. So that is something we need to understand as we study the term geopolitics. By the way, these figures are from the 2019 figures, because the reason I'm using 2019 figures is with the pandemic, the global economy is all shrunk, and then I might be giving everyone a wrong impression of what is happening in the world, right? So it's better to look at 2019 as a base year. So what is the third biggest economy in the world? Japan. So Japan has a $4.9 trillion economy, accounting for about 5.79% of the world economy. So these are the three big economies. And then we go to the fourth economy, India, at about $2.7 trillion, 3.18%. After we look at those four big countries, the other economies are followed by Russia at about $1.6 trillion, or nearly 1.93%. Then we have Indonesia, which is about $1 trillion at about 1%, and South Africa after that. And of course, we need to also, these economies I have talked about initially are the big global economies in Asia. So one of the reasons I did that is after the United States, one can go to the conclusion that Asian economies are the most powerful in the world. Now, let's look at the order of importance. After China and Japan, one has to look at Germany as the fourth biggest economy, because what I did earlier was to talk to you about Asian economies. Now, Germany in Europe is the fourth biggest economy. And then we have France, Italy, following Germany, and United Kingdom after that in Europe. So that is the European story after we look at the Asian story. But I want to emphasize the point that the Asian story is now bigger than the European story after the USA. And that is the reason I'm following in this order. So after Asia, after Europe, so one can already announce that US, Asia, other Asia bloc, and then a whole host of small countries, including Australia after that. But the important point I want to make is we need to understand two things. Number one, the global economy is about $96 trillion. And within the global economy, USA, China, Japan, Germany, India are the big economies that are calling the shots. We need to understand those two factors about that. Now, let's talk a little about debt. So if the global economy is $90 trillion, what is the global debt? So let me give you a figure for global debt between, in a recent analysis done, which is IMF data. The global debt as at February 2021, okay, is talked of as $281 trillion. Now, we must relate global debt to the GDP of annual GDP. So if we round the figures up, just for to make life easy for us, if the global GDP, I said, was 86, let's just round it up to 90 trillion. And let's say the global debt is 270 trillion, actually it's 281. You can say that global debt is 3 times the global GDP. And that is the figure I want everyone who is listening today to understand. Our debt is 3 times our GDP. So 90 trillion to 270 trillion. Actually, it's 86 and 270, right? 281. So global debt is 281. So how does global debt impact geopolitics? That should be the big question. And that is basically something we need to understand, because the countries which are cash rich have greater control of the global economy, increasingly now, more than in the past, than those countries who have significant debt. That is the simple comment on an economics point of view. Now, those days, in the past, people the stronger your economy was, the more debt you could have, because people were ready to lend to you because they knew that your economy will come back and repay all the loans. But today, I can tell you, a new phenomenon is now hitting the world, because global debt has become 300% of GDP. You can see people are now more interested in countries who have strong cash reserves, as opposed to simply having a debt-based global GDP. Right. So now, let's just talk about the top 2 countries, China and America. So China, let's start with America. So America, I said, is about a $20 trillion economy. But let me give you a stunning statistic. 90% of America's economy is in debt. So it is debt-funded economy, 90%, which means they owe money to various countries who have invested in their economy. And interestingly, China is the biggest debtor to America. Now, this is already telling us something about geopolitical strength, right? You can see the numbers are telling us a big story, Michael. Numbers are telling us a big story, right? Okay. Now let's ask the question, what is China's debt? So China has basically wiped out their debt. They are now considered a cash-rich nation. They have a $3 to $4 trillion cash surplus and reserve. Now, if I was to ask you, Michael, if you had to answer the question, which of these two economies, therefore, are stronger and which of these leverage ability and impact because of the way the debt is structured, what country will you say is the stronger or emerging stronger economy?
I would say China.
Absolutely, absolutely right. Because one has to realize one country has debt and some of the debt is held by China. The other country has a surplus and has cash reserves. Therefore, if you add up the debt of America held by China, and if you look at the cash reserves of China, China then has a much stronger overall position in the world. Very good. So now you have understood, everyone has got a chance to understand the word debt and geopolitics, right? You can see the connection between the two, right? Countries which have greater cash maneuverability will be stronger than countries who are in debt, right? And countries who keep piling up debt, eventually, at some stage in the world, they will have to pay up. And you can't keep borrowing for eternity. The day will come when the global economic order will crash if the whole world is already 300% in terms of debt. Now, there's another big implication of the word debt, and let me explain that. The next big implication of the word debt is that when you have more money than you should have, so if the global economy is 90 trillion, but people are consuming 281 trillion of goods and services. That is something one needs to understand. So we are consuming 3 times the planet's GDP through debt, right? 2 times, right? If you are a $90 trillion global economy and you're consuming $90 trillion, then there is no problem. But if you consume $180 trillion more than the global GDP, 3 times more, then you are overconsumption of resources is happening. And this is one of the reasons that we end up having what you and I call a massive crisis of overconsumption of the Earth's resources. And we say that most countries we are now at a stage, we are consuming 3 planets worth of resources. So actually, the time has come for people to realize that resources in the world are finite. The resources don't keep regenerating forever and ever. So on a finite resource-based planet, if you overconsume like you're doing at 300%, the day is going to come when we are going to run out of resources. So that is now giving a very detailed explanation of debt, geopolitics, and overconsumption, and how that comes and now hits us in terms of sustainability. Because what is the definition of sustainability? Sustainable development. Sustainable development is when we meet today's needs without compromising the needs of future generations. Meet today's needs without compromising the needs of future generations. And what this is now proving to all of us is that we are consuming resources that should be kept for future generations today. And now you can see how this has become a climate emergency, a geopolitical crisis, and a code red for humanity. So what is really happening as you study the word debt is we are having unsustainable development, not sustainable development. Number 2, we are making sure that your generation and the generation after you will run out of finite resources. That is the second thing that is happening as world leaders are basically consumed by debt, and all they want to do is to have a good life now and forget about future generations. So this is now nicely linking the story to sustainability as we look at it, okay? So now let me talk about the second general issue. First general issue is debt and overconsumption of resources on a finite planet. Now we come to the second issue, which is water stress. Water stress. So what is the problem about water stress? And you might ask me the question, the world is 70% water, sea water, and 30% land. And why are we talking about a water crisis? The reason for that is, out of the 70% of water in the world, only 3% are fresh water, 97% is salt water. Now, you and I cannot drink and live with salt water. And we can live, agriculture will thrive, and the world will succeed only with the 3% of fresh water. So what is happening to the 3% of fresh water in the world? That should be the next question. Why are we getting worried? 3% is a lot of water. Why we are getting worried is that 3% of fresh water is stored for us in what I call the world's freezer units. There are 3 freezer units: the North Pole or the Arctic, the South Pole or the Antarctic, or the Himalayas, which is the mid pole. That is where our fresh water, at least 2% of our fresh water from the 3% is stored. Then we have atmospheric water and groundwater. Now what is happening with global warming is that water cohort, which is only 3% of all the water in the world, is melting very fast as temperatures are now crossing 30, 40, 50 degrees centigrade. And we think, scientifically looking at this, that in the next 10, 20 years, there'll be no such thing as Arctic, Antarctic, and Himalayas. All the glaciers in the world will melt, and all this water will go into the oceans. And what will happen when that happens is we will have you cannot drink salt water. Sea level rise will then begin to impact all world economies. And I can tell you, majority of the world's capital cities will be basically underwater when sea levels rise 20 feet to 140 feet as the polar caps melt into the ocean. So London, New York, Shanghai, Mumbai, and these big cities which are in the ocean, which are seabed ocean cities, I can tell you today, in 2021, in the next 20 years, 30 years, if we don't stop this global warming, we are going to have all those cities underwater. Miami, New York, Shanghai, Mumbai, I can tell you there'll be no such cities in the world in the next 20, 25 years, as sea levels will wipe out those cities completely. And even Colombo is at risk with the amazing fast deterioration of the polar caps. Now, what are we discussing? We are discussing the geopolitics of water scarcity. I started explaining this first because we need to also understand what is happening in the planet, right? Because this is having a direct impact on geography. Now, water scarcity, I can tell you the global water scarcity map done by an organization called Aqueduct presents the 2030, 2020, and 2040 figures for water scarcity. So I can tell you in a second, by 2040, most of our northern Arctic water cap or polar cap will be melted by 2040. Now, 2040 is not 1,000 years away. 2040 is just 20 years away. In 20 years, we will no longer have a North Pole to go and North Pole, and the chances are we will not have the Himalayas, we will not have all the glaciers in the world by 2040. 20 years from now. So we must get ready to do things to stop that. Otherwise, we are going to be short of water to drink. Because we started by saying we cannot drink salt water and live. We cannot cook with salt water. We cannot have agriculture with salt water. We have to have desalinated water if we want to use them. And that is why the Middle East, which has no water, as a result of destroying all their forest cover, they don't have a rainwater cycle. That's why the temperatures are 40 and 50 degrees centigrade. Now, that's why they are spending enormous sums of US dollars and money to have desalination plants with massive burning of fossil fuels like petroleum and diesel to clean up their water, to desalinate the water. Now, basically, that is a massive cost. And if not for the oil income in these countries, they would never be able to afford it. Because most countries cannot afford the kind of desalination the Middle East is holding. So what countries are going to be massively impacted with the water crisis? That is the next question. So the countries are, majority of the countries in the Southern Hemisphere. Southern Hemisphere nations will basically be in absolute disaster with water by 2040, 2030. So what are these countries? So let me start with the big nations and big regions that will have water scarcity like nobody's business. Number one, India. Number two, the entire Middle East. Number three, most of North Africa and South Africa. Most of Australia, especially South Australia, especially the major cities of Australia that have populations. Then a good part of China will also have water scarcity. And by the way, even European Union, Spain, Portugal, almost every European city will be having a major water scarcity by 2040. Now, this is the reality. Now, the real question is, when there's this kind of water stress, what will happen? What will happen? So the real question is, then where will we have water? If there is no water in these places, where in the world will we have water? So I will now tell you, the water-rich nations of the world by 2040 will be Canada or North America, some of the countries in Scandinavia, and some of the countries and Russia will be water-rich. The northern part of Russia will be water-rich. So Russia and Canada and a bit of some of the Central African regions will yet have some water resources, but the rest of the world, 90% of the world's population will all be struggling for water. So what will that do geopolitically? What that will do is that will force massive climate refugees moving from Southern Hemisphere countries to Northern Hemisphere countries. So people will start migrating northern into the countries that have less water stress, and they will start beginning to move away from the countries they are living in, because without water you cannot live. So the second big issue after debt is water scarcity. Now, I hope I have explained this very, very clearly, that nobody has to wonder what he's talking about. All they need is a map of the world in front of them, and they will understand everything I'm saying now in this water crisis that we are about to face. So, two things will happen. Climate refugees will increase. Right now, we are having a refugee crisis, which is politically mooted by Belarus, where they are actually going to the countries in the Middle East and saying, come to Belarus and we will find a way for you to move to Europe through the Polish border. And basically, they are creating a crisis for the European Union as we speak. There are like 4,000 refugees there. But that is, I can tell you, not because of the water scarcity. That is because of Belarus, which is being influenced by Russia, trying to create problems for the European Union. Okay? That is how we need to understand the geopolitical issues. And before that, a couple of years back, we had a massive migration. That was because of the Syria crisis. People just left their, say, Iraq and Syria and Iran because they couldn't handle the crisis in terms of the warfare that was going on, ISIS and Iraq-Iran war. They just said, forget it, I'm going to leave this country. So that's how you had about 7-8 million people moving to Europe earlier. But the key point I want to make now is, where are people going? They are going to where the water is. And where is the water? At the moment, it's in Europe. But by 2040, it'll be Canada, the North Pole, some countries, and the Russias that will have the water. So remember, as we now discuss geopolitics, we must understand that the countries I talk to you about know what is happening in the world, know what will happen in the world, and they are leveraging their future strength now because they know they will be in the driving seat as the future rolls out, because otherwise they would not be shaking and rattling the cage so much because they know where they are going to be. So I can tell you in summary about water and geopolitics and climate refugees and nations with water, the nations with water. Also, the other area that will yet be somewhat water rich in the future will be the Amazonian countries. You know, the entire northern the north part of South Africa, because of the amazing green cover. But I have already told you that Bolsonaro chainsaw of Brazil is wiping out that, and maybe he wants to make Russia, the South American regions with water to be deserts. That is the only explanation I can give as to why he is destroying all the rainforests. So this is a very deep geopolitical understanding of the water crisis that is going to happen. Okay. Third and final issue is the geopolitics of petroleum and fossil fuel countries. So we need to bring that into the equation because that too is one of the causes of the climate emergency and the code red for humanity. So what do we have? The geopolitics of petroleum and fossil fuels. What we are having is about 8 to 9 countries, 5 to 6 countries in the world have decided we don't care about the rest of the world. As long as we can burn fossil fuels and grow our economies, it doesn't matter what the hell happens to the planet. It doesn't matter whether there's a climate emergency or not. It doesn't matter whether there's a code red for humanity or not. All we are interested in is growing our economies, burning more fossil fuels, and ignoring everything else. So this is what I call an extremely 19th century science-denying leadership of these countries. So what are these countries? So let's talk quite openly about what are these countries who actually blocked COP26 becoming a meaningful exercise because they were more concerned about economic growth than putting the planet and people before their profits. In other words, the countries I'm going to now talk to you about put profit before planet, put profit before people, and basically destroyed a good part of the world, right? So are basically going to watch the planet getting destroyed. So what are these countries? Number one, the number one country that objected to exiting fossil fuels at COP26 was India. because 70% of its energy is currently coal, and India has coal reserves. So India is number one who objected. Number two was China, who also has about 70% of its energy coming from polluting fossil fuels. So the first two countries that objected to this were these two. The next two countries that objected to this were Saudi Arabia, who depends for their economy, the export of fossil fuels. Petroleum, diesel is their number one export. They are the third country to object to exiting fossil fuels. Now, can you see the selfishness of these countries as I talk to you about them? Because they have put profit before planet. What these three countries, and I'll tell you a few more, like Australia, where a great part of their economy comes from exporting coal. Australia, Indonesia, another country that exports a lot of coal. And then, of course, we have the gas importing countries, exporting countries like Russia, who also objected to this changing of guard and moving away from fossil fuels. So let's go through the list of countries. I started with India, China. I talked about Australia. I talked about the Russias, and I talked about Indonesia. And of course, one has to also accept the fact that even today, countries like America and Germany yet have about a 30-40% of their energy coming from coal. So even those countries were ready to change, but the 6 countries I told you about objected to the change. So what we have to understand, Michael, is that global fossil fuel geopolitics is basically these 7 or 8 countries who have decided, and their leaders have decided, that we will not exit fossil fuels till 2040, 2050, 2060, or 2070, by which time the planet will be completely destroyed. They are thinking about short to medium-term profits versus the planet. And that is why one can say these countries and its leaders are basically 19th century leaders ready to compromise the planet and ignoring humanity, ignoring Code Red for Humanity call from the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. And one of the comments he made at COP26 was, we are digging our own grave for the future. And I want to be very specifically saying that the country is digging the planet's grave and basically ignoring the climate emergency and the Code Red for Humanity are the following countries. Starting, I mentioned India, China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Australia, Indonesia, Poland, and these countries have decided that they will put profit before planet. And I can tell you today, as we listen to this session, today is the 18th of November, 2021.
20th November, 20th November.
20th November, sorry, I'm 2 days behind. 20th November 2021. I want to underline that date, that I said by 20th November 2041, 20 years from now, we will have a catastrophic global water scarcity as a result of the country's leadership of the nations I just mentioned, the 7 to 8 nations, who have decided that they don't really care for the Code Red for Humanity or the climate emergency. And I hope the leaders of India, the leaders of China, the leaders of Russia, the leaders of Saudi Arabia, the leaders of Australia, the leaders of Indonesia, the leaders of even Turkey and Mexico will be replaced or will get educated from being 19th century science-denying leaders to be 21st century science embracing leaders who will do the right thing for the planet and for humanity. Right now, we have leaders who have only decided profit before planet. And a classic country like this is Australia. Australia has actually shamed themselves along with the 5-6 countries I have told you in COP26. In fact, the most shamed countries in COP26 are Australia, number 1, China, Russia, and the Saudi Arabia. These 4 countries were the most shamed in the COP26 as the countries which have absolutely ignored the climate emergency and the code red for humanity. So now I have given you all the 3 general issues that are to do with the code red for humanity and climate emergency in terms of water stress in the future. Yeah.
Thank you, Doctor, for the explanation. So if you could tell in terms of specific issues regarding global geopolitics, who are the actors?
Very good. That's a very good question. Now we need to understand, I have already hinted on all the actors based on cash reserves, on water reserves, and geopolitical maneuvering. So I can tell you that the biggest actors in the world in terms of geopolitical maneuverability are, in this order, USA number 1, because it yet has a little more influence through the United Nations and European Union than other countries. So I would say the biggest geopolitical actor yet is USA, but soon to change. I can tell you, very soon to change, and I will tell you why when we get to the next segment. Alliances with the European Union and the United Nations, which I must say is yet quite subservient to the United States. Even though we don't see it openly, there is a strength there in the US. So these 3 are major actors. After these 3, I won't even call it 3, this is one group of actors. The second group of actors is China on one side and Russia on the other side. So I would say, at best, if we want to call another actor, I would probably put India down as a possible future actor, and I would leave it at that in terms of my current analysis. So have I covered all the countries which are the big actors? Have I missed anyone?
Well, I guess you had covered, Doctor, or any more?
No, I think these are the ones. So once again, if I was to go through the list of global geopolitical influencers or the major actors of geopolitics in the world, I would say that these actors are mainly the USA, due to its linkage to the European Union and the connection it has to the UN, followed by China, followed by Russia, followed by India. These are going to be the global geopolitical actors. And I just want to mention one more thing, which I forgot to mention about water. So if one looks at global conflicts and global crises, I have a fantastic report here, dated Economist magazine, November 18th, 2019. And in the Economist magazine, November 18th, 2019, I saw something quite stunning. It says that between the year 3000 BC, before Christ, and the year 2019 AD, that is a massive period of time, 3000 BC to 2019 AD, after Christ, that majority of global conflicts and wars happen because of water shortages. Now, this is telling you something about geopolitical actors and the future of conflicts. So I can tell you today, on the 20th of November 2021, categorically, and this will be recorded for history, that within the next 20 years, as water becomes a scarce resource and melting polar caps, that the next couple of major global conflicts and wars will be precipitated by the water crisis. And this map, I can tell you there are countries which have used water as a weapon of conflict. Then there are countries, then there are situations where water is a trigger of or root cause of the conflict, weapon of conflict, root cause of conflict. And the third group is water resources or water systems as a casualty of conflict. So weapon of conflict, trigger of conflict, and a casualty of conflict. And in this map done by The Economist magazine, it beautifully shows us where the global conflicts are going to occur in the future and where they have occurred in the past. So this is something that we need to really understand as we look at the word geopolitics. Okay? So I have shared with you who are the actors, and this kind of water scarcity is going to trigger, as per the World Bank report called Groundswell, they say there'll be 143 million climate migrants in the next 10 to 20 years, of which nearly 90 million will come from Africa, 40 million will come from Asia, and 17 million of them will come from South America, giving us up nearly 140 to 150 million refugees. But I'm going to now top up that figure with my analysis. This is what the World Bank is saying will happen by 2050. Now, on the 20th of November 2021, my prediction is that by 2030, not 2450, by 2030, that the world will have between 200 to 300 million climate refugees. 200 to 300 million, which is double the size of what the World Bank has said. And majority of these people will go from Africa, Middle East. They have not mentioned the Middle East in this report, but I can tell you a massive migration will happen from the Middle East, Africa, Middle East, South Asia, and Latin America, and even some of the border nations like Portugal, people will begin to move up because of the global water crisis. So I think now we have very comprehensively covered all these major issues and major actors. And this introduction was very important for me to get everyone understanding why we need to study geopolitics for national strategy and business strategy.
Great. So thank you, Dr. Fernando, for explaining about that. And finally, can we talk about the One Belt, One Road strategy?
Okay, now, before I go to One Belt, One Road, I want to spend a little time explaining to you how these actors, main actors, will influence and be influenced in the future. So the first actor I mentioned to you was USA, correct? And one of the things that I mentioned to you was USA gets its influencer status of geopolitics from also the fact that they influence the United Nations, but less and less, because Russia and China now have veto power. They influence the United Nations and they influence the European Union. Now, one of the things that will emerge for these three regional groups and USA is now the ascending of power of China is going to begin to split those very strong alliances, because nations are going to basically say, should we stay loyal to America, or should we start aligning ourselves to the future world leader, China, right? They are going to be caught between the devil and the deep blue sea in terms of who should be aligned, okay? So let me give you two examples about how the European Union has aligned itself. I already told you that America has influence, and I yet call it the #1 influencer. But when China launched their new bank, the Asian Infrastructure Development Bank, about 4 to 5 years back, America appealed to the European Union countries and said, please don't join this bank, because if you join this bank, you're going to weaken the control we have of the world through the IMF and the World Bank. So what do you think happened when America send that signal to the European Union? What do you think happened? Do you think the European Union listened to America, or do you think the European Union ignored America? Only two possible answers. Did they listen to America and avoid the Asian Infrastructure Bank investment, or did they say, forget about America, we are going to do it?
It's just a guess, but I think they went with the US.
Okay, so the answer is they actually ignored the US. They ignored the US, and basically among the first investors in the new Asian Infrastructure Development Bank set up by the Chinese to support the China One Belt, One Road were the major European Union countries. And one of the key points I also want to mention to you today is the amount of business that is happening between China and Europe. So today, the trade deficit that the European Union run with China is about 164 billion euros. And the trade, in terms of GDP, you can see that China and Europe have a trade of between 13.6 billion euros and 12.2 billion euros. And in terms of the world population, China's cohort is about 18% of the world population. European Union combined is only 5%, 5.7%, 6%. 6 versus 16%. The first point I'm trying to make today is you need to understand why the European Union did not listen to America. They didn't listen to America because they would have, if they listened to America, lost about a 13 to 14 billion euros worth of trade in one shot. Because the Chinese would have said, okay, you're not going to join with us in this strategy. We are going to ignore you too. Can you see? We are going to lose massive economic leverage with China if we do this. So now I have explained to you how America's power is going to weaken in the future and has already weakened because of the European Union deciding to align itself to China. Is that clear?
Okay.
Okay, now this next group that I said America has influence in or had influence in, I must use the word had influence in Europe, had influence in the UN, had influence in the IMF and the World Bank. So why? What has happened? With the coming up of the Asian Infrastructure Bank, China has basically reset the importance of the IMF and the World Bank. They are not as important to the world today as they were before China's Asia Infrastructure Development Bank. And the Asian Infrastructure Development Bank was set up to moot and support the China strategy of China One Belt, One Road in terms of 132 countries in the world. There are 200 countries in the world. 132 are in the China One Belt, One Road strategy. So for that reason, number one, I can tell you America's influence is going to diminish and has diminished dramatically with every passing day. America is becoming less influential. And I can also tell you that the 4 years that Donald Trump ran America, he also contributed to America losing its global position and with the European Union, because he decided he was going to cut back on NATO investments. He also decided that he's not going to support the European Union in a crisis. And basically, European Union now had to decide between America that might not help them in a crisis and China, who is at least helping them in a crisis, who are supporting the economy. So it is not a surprise for me that the European Union have aligned themselves more with China than with the United States already. And I can tell you, in most of the countries that I operate and work in the European Union, I see dramatic Chinese investment in joint ventures, in manufacturing, in banks. In most of the European countries I work with, there is a massive investment of China already. So I can tell you, I see every time I go to Luxembourg, most of the European capitals, all the Chinese banks are there. Chinese companies are already manufacturing. And a lot of the big Chinese companies like BYD in terms of electric vehicles, the solar companies like Trina Solar and Jinku Solar are already manufacturing in Europe, right? So the European Union is not going to sacrifice all this for China, for America ever. And today, America's position as a global leader has weakened dramatically with what I just explained to you right now. Okay? Then the other actors, you can mention who the other actors I mentioned are.
China, Russia, and India.
Okay, now let's talk a little about India first, because it's easy to talk about India because we don't have to spend too much time talking about India's geopolitical influence, because India decided that they were going to be aligned to the US. So therefore, India is probably one of the few aligned states to the USA at the moment. But I can see, because of its close proximity to China, that alignment with time might change due to economic issues, economic reasons. And this is something we need to talk about. So I see a very limited influence of India in the global geopolitics. USA will continue to have influence, but diminishing influence. The other two countries I mentioned are China and Russia. China's influence is on the ascendancy and ascending rapidly with every moment. And Russia's influence will also continue to ascend because of some of the geographical issues I told you in terms of water availability in the world in the future. So I see China and Russia as the key players in the future, not India so much. So now let me talk a little about Russia and end with China, which is the most important one. So let's talk a little about Russia. So one of the things that we are seeing happening in terms of China and Russia is they are beginning to sometimes almost complement each other's global strategy. You see, that is something I'm seeing happening now. So Russia is ready to complement China, and China is ready to support Russia's strategy, right? And how do I know that? At COP26, these are two countries who did not even attend COP26. Now, by not attending COP26, what is the message they're sending the world? They're sending the world a very simple message. We don't care for the United Nations or anything that the United Nations is doing anymore. We will do what we want. For us, we don't even want to waste time attending these meetings, because in our mind, they are no longer an influential power in the world. And that is something, a very strong message Russia and China have sent the whole world together. And not only both of them, even Brazil sent that message, right? So now let's talk a little about Russia first. So Russia currently is having some issues because they are no longer in the G7. They have been taken out of the G7. So they are isolated there. However, Russia continuously is looking at ways and means of expanding its influence in Europe. So where are they influencing in Europe? Number one, Russia has already annexed Crimea, a seaport island, a defense Russian former shipping port. They are massively influencing what is happening in Ukraine. They are massively in control, slowly but surely, of Ukraine. And I can see today, as we speak, on the 20th of November, Russian forces are already on the Ukraine border. All the Russian forces are amassed in the Ukraine border. And for the last 5 to 10 years, we have seen massive influence amongst the Russian special forces, Russian agencies in Ukraine, trying to influence Ukraine dramatically. Once again, I must tell you, Donald Trump, when he was leader of the USA, actually directly supported Russia by putting Ukraine under more pressure, because what he did was to use Ukraine's vulnerability with the Russians by not giving them defense support and saying, I will give you defense support only if you help me win the election. And he wanted the Ukrainians to actually start coming up with some bad stories about Joe Biden. And if you remember, there was a big story about all this sometime back before the 2016, before the 2020 US election. So what I see is, once again, just as much as Donald Trump has ruined America's respect in the European Union, it has also ruined its respect in the Ukraine, thanks to one man, one selfish leader who put his presidency before the world, put his presidency before America's power and influence, and put selfishly his thinking before the whole world, and lost respect for America. So Russia is already influencing Ukraine. Russia is influencing the already taken over Crimea. Right now, what is Russia doing? They are using Belarus to influence their strategy to destabilize the first nation that is closest to Russia, Poland. They are putting 4,000 people on the Polish border from Belarus. Belarus is totally blindly loyal to Russia. And you can see that Russia is slowly maneuvering this story. And what we have to read from a geopolitical point of view is, we must not look at this in isolation. We must look at this in the total big picture of Russia's European influence strategy and how they are in the amassing troops in Ukraine and influencing Ukraine, while they are using Belarus to now put pressure on the NATO forces and European Union in Poland. By then, what will happen if there's a crisis, and tomorrow if Russia decides we will invade Ukraine, NATO forces have to decide whether they are going to help Ukraine, who is not a NATO country yet. And for a long time, Ukraine has wanted to be a member of NATO. So the delay in making Ukraine a NATO nation then gives Russia an opportunity to put their pressure into NATO. And then if they simultaneously put pressure in Poland, the NATO has to go to Poland's rescue. That will leave Ukraine very vulnerable. So this is my analysis of the Russian future geopolitics. Lastly, now we can talk about China. You see, I do things in a very logical manner and in a very strategic manner, because I could have answered your question before answering what I just told you. But as you heard me, now you understand the big picture much better than in the past. Am I right?
Yes.
Exactly. So we need to understand the big picture before we understand the small picture. Okay. So now let's now get to the China One Belt One Road. So what is the China One Belt One? They have a belt and road. The belt is very much the sea route, and the road is the land route. So they have a massive land strategy, which is starting in Hangzhou, going through Beijing, touching cities that are across the world, across China first, like Xi'an, and move slowly into countries like moving right through Tehran in Iran, going through Samarkand, Bishkek, Almaty, Istanbul in Turkey, connecting with Russia, and ending up in Europe, connecting Amsterdam, Duisburg in Germany, and Venice, all in their one belt, one road strategy. And they have another connecting road connection from Kashgar, right through Pakistan, Islamabad, into Gwadar seaport. So they have two road networks. They have a third road network, which is going from Beijing right the way through Astana, through Moscow, into Duisburg and Amsterdam. So they have three road networks in their road network strategy for the 21st century. Now, let's look at the belt, the sea belt route. So what are the countries that are important in the sea belt? So here, once again, we start in Xinjiang in China, move right through to Hanoi in Vietnam, and from Hanoi, they connect Kuala Lumpur. From Kuala Lumpur, they connect Jakarta, and from Jakarta, they go to Kolkata in India. They also, believe it or not, connect Colombo as one of the major ports in their belt sea route. And from Colombo, they also move into Mombasa in Africa. They go to Djibouti, and through the Suez Canal, they go to Athens and Venice. And believe it or not, these road networks, rail networks, and maritime networks that I just described to you in China's One Belt, One Road is what I call China's geopolitical and economic growth influential strategy. So do you know how many countries are in this Belt and Road Initiative? 138 countries. Now can you see how China is ascending and US is descending in geopolitical influence in the world? That is the thing that I wanted to share with you today, right? China is ascending, US is descending, and then we have to ask the question, in one of the interesting maneuvers that China is also doing, China is building a very strong relationship with all the countries surrounding India. Sri Lanka in the south, Pakistan in the north of India, and most of the countries that are bordering China, bordering India, are already very much aligned to China. So China is encircling India. That is why I said that China's influence that India's influence is going to be diminishing as we watch it. Now, let's look at the reason why China is now becoming a global superpower. I would tell you that if we look at the global economy from a purchasing power parity point of view, today China has already overtaken America to be the #1 economy, right? It is already the global #1 economy. So what are some of the important points that we need to understand about China as they move forward geopolitically? The first point I want you to remember about China is China has decided that they want to be the world's science-made superpower. They want to be the science-made superpower. They want to advance technologically and scientifically and not any other way. Now, why is this point so important, Watson? Because if you remember, when I talked about the 4 characteristics of a 21st century leader, characteristic 1, I said, a leader in the 21st century must have an appreciation and ready to mobilize science. You remember, first most important characteristic of a 21st century leader is they must appreciate and mobilize science. What is China telling the world? We will overtake every one of you because our leadership respects science and mobilizes science much better, and we are building a nation of excellence in terms of manpower and knowledge through science. And what they are looking at, and here's a quote from Ceylon Wu on the 1st of October 2019 in the International Journal of Science, 2019 October 1st. And the topic is China, how science made a superpower. How science made a superpower. And Ceylon Wu says, traces the rise of the dominant force in science in the second of a series of essays on the ways in which, in the past 150 years, have shaped today's research system and making nature's anniversary in China. So China started planning to become a world superpower, not yesterday, not day before. They have been planning and working on this the last 150 years. And also you must make a note that China was the world superpower before the Americas way in old history. So China is actually reascending to where they were before America took over as the world superpower and before Europe took over as the world superpower. China was the world superpower and the Europeans took it over, then America took it over. Okay? So now what is China doing in terms of their strategy? They have a program called Science for All. It has created and centralized educational and institutional infrastructure for science. And it has made the major industries of high technology the focus in China, and they want to achieve this superiority by 2025. And I can tell you as at today, very soon I will tell you their superiority already. Okay? In China's science-led technology superiority. Now, they are doing one other thing before I go there. China has sent to the world's best universities the most talented students, the brightest students, between 1978 to 2018. The government of China paid for this number of students to go to the best Western European universities and learn the most important science subjects and come back to China. Now, I want to ask you a simple question. How many people do you think China has sent to the West, to American Ivy League universities like Harvard, Stanford, Yale, to Oxford, Cambridge? How many students do you think China has sent between 1978 and 2018? Have a guess.
Probably, let's say around 10,000.
10,000. I want to give you another chance to make a bigger guess. It's more than 10,000.
All right. Probably about 75,000.
Right. Now, lots of us thought like you did. We thought such a small, about 75,000 Chinese have gone in the last 20, 30 years to the West and educated themselves. So now I'm going to give you the stunning figure that is in this article. 5.86 million students. 5 1.86 million Chinese students have been sent the best universities to learn science in the US, in Europe, the Oxfords, Cambridges, the Yales, Harvards, Stanfords. I'm telling you, China populated those universities with their best and brightest students. And here's the real story. All these guys who went and studied mostly in these universities have all come back to China. They are now the people leading China's 21st century science-led economic dominance of the world. And now you know why I have said science is the most important subject in a 21st century strategy. Can you understand that now? Because the nation who leads the world in science will be the nation who will lead the world. And this is something that you all Noah Harari's book, 21st Century, very clearly mentions. And as you know, that's the book that influenced me to create our 21st century board leadership masterclass model and masterclass in getting a US copyright in June 2020. Because I knew that one has to read all these other trends if one really wants to understand the geopolitics. So now the key question you must be thinking is, now you tell me that China is leading the world in technology. What proof do you have? Am I right? What is the proof you have that China is actually already the world leader in technology? So here's a very interesting article written by a lady called a person called Rachit Watts from the Benzinga staff on July 1st, 2021. He has a quotation from Elon Musk. And what does Elon Musk say about China? Here's what Elon Musk says. Economic prosperity achieved by China encourages people to visit and see for themselves. Elon Musk is saying China is already the world leader in technology. Go to China and see for yourself. Now, if a 21st century leader like Elon Musk is saying, go to China and see for yourself, the only reason he has done that is because he has already gone and seen for himself. Do you understand? So I'm sorry I interrupted you there.
Oh,
okay,
sorry.
So now what is the proof? So Elon Musk is saying, go to China and see for yourself, because he has already done that. So now let me tell you what science and technological leadership China already has. Already. And have beaten America significantly. So number one, nanotechnology. You know, I was the first CEO and founder CEO of the Sri Lanka Institute of Nanotechnology, SLINTech, in 2008, August. And when I was the head of SLINTech as CEO, one of the first things I did was to do some research on who are the countries leading in nanotechnology in the world. I expected to see America leading the world in nanotechnology. In 2008, I can tell you, China was already filing more US patents for nanotechnology than the US. So they had already overtaken the US in nanotechnology in 2008, Watson. Not now, 2008. So number one, China leads the world in nanotechnology. Number two, China leads the world in 3D printing for construction. China is the advanced user of 3D printing technology for construction. If you remember during the COVID crisis, China built a 100,000 person hospital in 1 month or 2 months. Why? How can you do that? Because they used about 200 to 300 3D printing, 10 to 20,000 3D printing machines which are mass industrial 3D printers, and they build this building in no time. Not only that, today China builds a 2-story building in 3 hours with 3D printing. So China is now significantly ahead of the rest of the world in 3D printing. Now let's look at the other things they are heading. Solar power. Do you know China is already 70% of the world's solar power manufacturing market? They are the world leader in solar power. They are the world leader in wind power, right? Already. And wind and solar are tomorrow's energy sources. They are already the world leader there. Electric rail. Do you know that today China has 70% of the world's electric rail? If you look at all the electric rail in the world and ask where is this happening, 70% of all the rail networks in the world are in China. And they have an amazing train called the maglev. Maglev is the equivalent of the bullet train in Japan and the TGV in France, but it is much more superior in technology. And the maglev is now moving at about 400 to 420 kilometers per hour. And it's the fastest train on the planet, and using high technology and electric rail. They are not using any fossil fuels for their trains anymore. And what is quite amazing is when I went to China, I used to go to China up to the 2019 to teach there. I have been teaching in Shanghai the last 8 years in a course called Making Excellence in Business for an organization called CIOEL, which is based in France next to the INSEAD Business School. They're actually brother companies. And I was teaching this business excellence program in Shanghai. Every time I used to go to Shanghai, I would go to the airport in Pudong and then wait for the company car to pick me up from CIOEL. And I would take about 1 hour to get to Shanghai, depending on the time I arrived in the airport. So suppose I arrived in the night, I would get to Shanghai in 45 minutes. If I arrived in the morning, it would take me 1.5 to 2 hours because of traffic. Now, the last 2 times I went to Shanghai, they arranged for me to get on the maglev train from Pudong Airport to Shanghai town, straight next to the hotel where we teach the course. I want to ask you, take a guess, how many minutes is taking me now when I go to Shanghai?
From the car or the
airport.
Airport.
Train, from the maglev train.
Yeah, the train is, I heard from another source, it takes about 15 minutes, 10 minutes.
You're right. So it takes 6 minutes. 6 minutes. A trip I used to take 1.5 hours to 45 minutes, I'm now doing in 6 minutes. And that is an example of how China's electric rail is now becoming the world champion for electric rail. And I heard that the American government has invited China Rail to come and do the electric rail in America. Now, that is proof that China has overtaken America in electric rail too. What are the other sectors they are now world number 1? In terms of electric vehicles, BYD company and NIO company, and China has a lot of electric vehicle companies, are today dramatically outselling Tesla in terms of car sales. Of course, that is not a surprise because China has 1 billion people, 1.1 billion people, and the markets that Tesla is playing in, combined, the population must be now about 500 million. So if you are in a market that is double the size of Tesla's total market potential, and now you know why Tesla has opened a factory in Shanghai, because they don't want to lose this massive growth that is happening in electric cars. So BYD is among the top 2 or 3 electric vehicle companies, but I would put BYD ahead of Tesla in terms of electric vehicles today, because not only is China, BYD, the number one or two, I mean, let's say number two in cars, but they are the number one in all other electric vehicles. So when you talk about coaches, they are the number one. When you talk about these other utility vehicles, they are the number one. Even if you go to any airport in the world today, BYD vehicles are the ones that take you from the airport to the plane. They have introduced all these new electric vehicles. So when I look at the big picture, I think in electric vehicle terms, I think China has overtaken Tesla, and China is the leader in electric vehicles because they have gone into sports utility vehicles. They have gone into all these luxury coaches, buses, the mainstream buses that countries are using for public transport. They have gone into the heavy duty vehicles that take goods from one part of the world country to another country. So I would put China ahead of America already in electric vehicles. The next two areas are artificial intelligence mobilization and drone technology for agriculture. So AI mobilization and the use of internet shopping, China is already the number one. You can see artificial intelligence, China is already the world leader in AI. Drone technology for agriculture, you know, China is a big agriculture producer in the world and among the top 5. They have now moved into very high-tech drone technology for agriculture. So what do we see? We have nanotechnology, 3D printing for construction, solar power, wind power, electric rail, electric vehicles, AI mobilization, and drone technology for agriculture. 8 areas that China is already the world leader. What was their plan? Their plan was to become the leader in science and technology led global leadership. They already did in 8 important categories in the world. And what is also interesting is when you look at these categories, nanotechnology, 3D printing, electric vehicles, AI, and solar and wind, actually all 8 of them are not yesterday's technologies, they are tomorrow's technologies. They are future technologies. Can you see? They are not trying to win in old technologies. They want to win in tomorrow's technologies. And tomorrow is the 21st century. And this is where I say China is absolutely influencing the world. And whether it is 5G, whether it is any of those technologies I mentioned, I can tell you China today has basically beaten the rest of the world in terms of almost every sector. So geopolitically, one of the other things we are now seeing is China's beginning to rattle their saber about moving, annexing Taiwan. Okay? They also already basically are in control of Hong Kong. Now, by annexing Hong Kong, by basically taking control of Hong Kong, and Hong Kong, of course, trying to fight against the Chinese regime, have failed miserably, and China has brought the whole thing under control, as you know. Yeah, they have already done that. So what we are seeing, quite interestingly now, is an unbelievable story that's taking the world by storm and beginning to have a great influence in the world. Now, one of the questions you have to ask me now is, if this is the new geopolitical arena that we are playing with, a diminishing American influence, a ascending Chinese influence, and a irritant Russian influence in Europe. These are the 3 big stories that we need to understand in geopolitics. How does that influence business strategy? Because one has to finally talk about 21st century business leaders. I'm talking about business leaders. So any future business leader who doesn't understand what I have told you right now about the changes that are happening in the world today is going to be ignorant about how their business can be disrupted by these three massive changes in the world. You know, these three massive changes in the world are going to have a dramatic impact on everything that is going to happen in the whole story. And that is probably going to be the most important thing to remember. Okay? So is this clear in terms of geopolitics?
Perfect.
And business leaders who ignore this will suddenly wake up in the morning and say they have no business because they align to the wrong party. Or they might find that they are in a country that one of the geopolitical giants of, I only told you three names, America, USA, Russia, and China, are having such an influence that their wrong alignment puts them out of the business. So tomorrow's 21st century leaders have got to be understanding geopolitics, have got to read geopolitics, have got to do something at their board level. They must invite, they can't have a board member for geopolitics, but they must invite a strategy advisor to the board of directors to read what is happening in the global geopolitics and advise every company what might be the impacts of what I have just mentioned for their company's future and for their company's results. Yeah? So that is basically the important point that I want to mention. Yeah?
Great. So thank you very much, Dr. Fernando, for explaining about geopolitics in our episodes. And for all those who are listening, you can check out our videos on YouTube. So Dr. Fernando has given information, and he has explained with certain examples. So you all can watch and learn from it. So once again, thank you very much, Dr. Fernando, for taking time and doing this interview. And we'll see you all soon on our last episode, which will be governance disruption. Great.
Now, Watson, I just want to say one thing just before we finish.
Sure.
The thing I want to mention to everyone who is listening today is these ideas that I have shared with you on geopolitics, or the ideas I have shared with you on any of the subjects that we have covered so far, are my personal ideas. These are not the ideas of either the institutions that I work with or any of the organizations I work with. So I want to make it very clear, please understand, these are my personal views and my personal reading and my personal analysis as a 21st century leader of what is happening in the world. They have nothing to do with any of the organizations that I work with or any of the countries I operate in. So please, I want to give that disclaimer in this program, because I don't want them to think that any of the organizations I am attached to have the same view of what I have said. Thank you, Michael. I want to say that that is very important.
Sure. So for all of you heard what Dr. Fernando said. So, right. So thank you once again, Dr. Fernando, for doing this interview. And we'll see you all soon with our final episode.
Bye.